You won't believe what happened next. John Davis, a 35-year-old former Army combat engineer, stepped into the bustling airport terminal, his loyal K-9 partner Max by his side. As he walked through the security checkpoint, he noticed something strange. Max, usually calm and alert, was on high alert, his nose twitching, his ears perking up. Without warning, Max broke free from his handler's grip and sprinted toward a nearby baby stroller. The stroller, pushed by an elderly woman, stood near the waiting area, and Max had locked onto it like a missile. John's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a random action. Max had sensed something. People around him gasped as Max leapt into the stroller, startling everyone nearby. The elderly woman, confused and startled, took a step back, but Max didn't care. His nose was pressed against the fabric of the stroller, his body rigid. John rushed over, trying to regain control of his dog, but Max was focused. He wasn't moving. In a flash, John reached the stroller, his eyes scanning the area for anything unusual. As he lifted Max out of the stroller, something small and metallic fell out, clinking onto the floor. His heart pounded. He quickly bent down to examine it. A small metallic object, no bigger than a coin, lay on the floor. It wasn't just any piece of trash. John's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just an ordinary object. Max had detected something dangerous, and he knew it. John quickly motioned to his colleagues, signaling them to secure the area. The object was unlike anything they had seen before, and the alarm bells started ringing in John's head. This could be something serious, but what exactly was it? Max, still tense, stood beside John, his amber eyes scanning the crowd. The chaos around them escalated as airport security moved in, the tension thickening. John's thoughts raced. How had Max known? What was this object, and why was it in the stroller? Just then, a loud beep echoed through the terminal. The object was scanned, and the result was immediate, an alert. Max had led them to something much bigger than they ever anticipated. It wasn't just a false alarm. This was the beginning of something that would shake the airport to its core. As security moved swiftly to investigate, John couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. Max, his trusty K-9 partner, had once again saved the day. But this discovery was only the tip of the iceberg. John could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. What they had uncovered would change everything, but they didn't know yet just how deep the mystery ran. Max's actions had set everything in motion. The question wasn't just about what the object was. It was about what they were going to uncover next. And they were about to find out that things were much bigger than they ever imagined. As security continued to swarm the area, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He glanced down at Max, still on edge, his amber eyes scanning every movement, every sound around them. The moment the object had been scanned, an instant alert had gone off, signaling that this wasn't just a random piece of metal. It was a key to something much larger. John could feel the air around him thickening, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He stood motionless for a second, trying to piece together what was happening. Max had led them here, but what now? As security began to cordon off the area, John exchanged a look with Olivia Carter, the head of airport security, who had arrived just moments after the initial alert. She was already on her phone, making calls, her face a mask of concentration. The situation was escalating quickly. John took a deep breath, the silence around him feeling deafening. He knew he had to stay focused. The last thing they needed was panic. As the tension mounted, Olivia hung up her phone and turned to John. "It's not just a random object," she said, her voice steady but her eyes revealing the anxiety creeping in. "It's a coded device. Someone's trying to send a message." A cold chill ran down John's spine. "A message? What kind of message?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know yet, but it's connected to a string of suspicious activities around the airport," Olivia replied. "We're going to need to shut down the terminal for a while." John nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Where's the baby?" he asked, his mind racing. "The woman with the stroller?" Olivia shook her head. "She's gone. We're reviewing the footage now. She wasn't a part of this, but someone else might be. We'll find her, don't worry." John's gaze shifted back to Max, who was still staring at the spot where the object had fallen. The dog's behavior was unsettling, almost as if it was still sensing something beyond the object itself. It was as if Max knew they weren't just dealing with a simple security threat. The moment was becoming increasingly surreal. John could feel his pulse quicken. Whatever they were about to uncover was far beyond anything he had anticipated. The object wasn't just a security breach. It was the first piece of a puzzle that was rapidly falling into place. Olivia turned to him, her face serious. "We've got teams in place. We're going to get to the bottom of this." John nodded again, but a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. This was only the beginning, and they hadn't even scratched the surface of what was really going on. Max let out a low growl, his body tense as he turned towards the far corner of the terminal. John's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could there be something else? Before he could move, a sudden noise, footsteps, echoed in the distance. Max's growl intensified. John followed his dog's gaze, and what he saw next made his blood run cold. A man in a dark coat, who had been lurking near the exit, turned sharply and made a break for the door. His movements were deliberate, swift, and too confident for someone just trying to escape. Without thinking, John bolted after him. "Olivia," he shouted as he ran. "Get ready, we've got someone on the move." The chase was on. John's heart raced as he sprinted after the man, his boots pounding against the hard tile of the airport terminal. Max, his loyal canine partner, was close behind, the dog's powerful legs carrying it with ease. The man in the dark coat was fast, but John was faster. He could see the door ahead, the man's escape route. The tension in the air was thick, every second stretching out longer than the last. John's mind was focused solely on the man ahead, his movements sharp and precise. As they neared the door, John's breath came in sharp bursts. He could feel his muscles burning, but there was no time to slow down. He had to stop this man before he got away. The man glanced over his shoulder, his eyes flashing with something John couldn't place. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something calculated. The man's gaze met John's, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, the man pushed open the door and bolted into the cold, rainy night. Max was on it immediately. The dog lunged forward, a blur of motion, and in a split second, he was on the man's heels, forcing him to stop dead in his tracks. John caught up just in time to see the man freeze. There was nowhere to go now. John grabbed the man's arm, pulling him back from the door. "You're not going anywhere," John said, his voice calm but firm. The man struggled, but Max's powerful jaws held him in place. "What's going on?" John demanded, his voice growing more urgent. The man didn't answer, his eyes darting around, looking for a way out. "What was in that device?" John asked again, his grip tightening. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and strained. "You don't understand," he muttered. "You'll never understand what's really happening here." John's mind raced. The object, the coded message, none of this was making sense. Who was this man? What had he been doing? "Tell me everything," John said, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. The man let out a bitter laugh. "It's already too late," he said. "You've all been looking in the wrong place." John's confusion deepened. He looked over at Olivia, who had arrived at the door, her eyes wide with alarm. "What does he mean?" she asked. John shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to find out, and fast." The man's expression shifted, and for the first time, John saw fear in his eyes. "You're already too late," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. John's mind raced as he processed the man's words. Was there something bigger going on? What had they missed? Olivia stepped forward, motioning for John to let go of the man. "We need to get him to a secure location, now," she said, her voice urgent. John nodded, but his thoughts were still racing. What had the man meant? They weren't just dealing with a simple security threat. This was something far bigger, and it was happening right under their noses. As the man was escorted away, John's mind couldn't help but drift back to Max, who had led them here. Max had sensed something before anyone else. What had they really uncovered? John knew they were just scratching the surface, and the answers were slipping further and further away, but they were getting closer. Much closer. As the man was escorted out of the terminal, John couldn't shake the unsettling feeling creeping into his chest. He watched as Olivia gave orders for a full sweep of the area, but his mind kept going back to the same question. What had they really uncovered? The coded device, the strange behavior of the man, and the urgency in his last words haunted John. He glanced at Max, still at his side, his eyes sharp and alert as always. Max had led them here, but now John felt like they were no closer to the answers they needed. Olivia turned to him, her face grim. "We're taking him to a secure location. We'll get everything we can out of him." John nodded, but the nagging feeling remained. Something about the man's words stuck with him. "You're already too late." They hadn't just interrupted a simple threat. They had uncovered a piece of a much larger puzzle, and the more John thought about it, the more it felt like they were being led down a path they weren't meant to walk. He turned back to Max, who was still scanning the terminal, his nose twitching as if he was picking up something they couldn't. "What is it, boy?" John murmured. Max's ears perked up, and John could see the tension in his posture. It was as if the dog knew they were missing something crucial. John stepped closer to the security desk, his eyes scanning the monitors. He saw the footage from the earlier incident. The moment Max had jumped into the stroller, the metallic object falling to the ground. He watched it again, studying the way Max had reacted. The dog hadn't just been curious. He had been focused, determined. But why? What had he sensed? John's thoughts were interrupted by Olivia's voice. "We've got something." She walked over, holding a tablet in her hands. "We've traced the man's movements. He wasn't just a random passenger. He's been to multiple airports in the past week, and he's been in contact with a few key individuals." John felt a rush of adrenaline. "What kind of individuals?" Olivia hesitated before responding. "We're still working on that, but it's clear he's not acting alone. This is bigger than we thought." John's mind raced as he pieced everything together. The object, the man's behavior, Max's instincts. It was all starting to fall into place. But where did they go from here? Olivia was already talking to one of her team members, coordinating the next steps. John glanced down at Max, who was still watching him intently. It was as if the dog was waiting for the next move, ready to lead them wherever they needed to go. The air in the terminal felt heavy, charged with uncertainty. John's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out quickly. A message from an unknown number. "You're not done yet." His stomach dropped. He stared at the message, feeling a cold shiver run down his spine. This was far from over. They had barely scratched the surface, and whatever was coming next was only going to get worse. John looked back at Olivia, his resolve hardening. "Let's move," he said, his voice steady. They had a long road ahead, but John knew one thing for certain. Whatever the threat was, they would face it together. And Max would be right there beside him, guiding them every step of the way. John stood in the quiet airport hallway, his mind racing. The message on his phone still burned in his pocket. "You're not done yet." The words were a warning, but who had sent it? And what did it mean? He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he wasn't about to back down now. Olivia walked up to him, her expression tense. "We've got another lead," she said, her voice low. "The man we caught. His contact information is linked to several other people. They've been in and out of this airport for the past few days. We need to find them before they disappear." John nodded, already making a mental note of their next steps. Max, standing by his side, let out a low growl. His amber eyes were fixed on the hallway ahead, and John followed his gaze. Max's instincts were never wrong. Something was off, but what? "What is it, boy?" John asked quietly, crouching down to Max's level. The dog's ears were perked, and his nose twitched, as if picking up a scent. John's gut tightened. He had no idea what Max was sensing, but he trusted the dog more than anyone else. Olivia looked at them both, her brow furrowing. "We've cleared the terminals. There's no one else here, John." But John couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He stood up and looked at Olivia. "Let's check the surveillance footage again. Maybe we missed something." They moved quickly through the terminal, following the clues that seemed to be slipping away with every passing minute. As they approached the security room, John's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the airport system, a sudden alert. The area around Gate 34 had gone dark. No cameras were working, no lights were on. Just a black hole in the middle of the terminal. "What the hell?" Olivia muttered, her voice tinged with frustration. "That's not possible. The systems don't go down like that." John's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a technical glitch. Someone had hacked into the system, and they were one step ahead. "We need to go to Gate 34. Now," he said, his voice firm. Max's growl grew louder as they approached the gate, his body tense and ready for whatever lay ahead. They reached the gate, and the air felt heavy, charged with the unknown. John looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. The hallway was eerily quiet. Olivia's footsteps echoed as she moved forward, scanning the area with her flashlight. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Where is everyone? Then, as if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. John tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio. Max's growl grew more intense. They weren't alone. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and cloaked in dark clothing. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but John recognized the figure immediately. It was the man they had encountered earlier, the one who had slipped through their fingers. The man stopped in his tracks when he saw John and Olivia. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The air was thick with tension. "I knew you'd be here," the man said, his voice cold and calculating. John stepped forward, his hand tightening on the radio. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over at Max, who was still growling at him. "Your dog knows more than you think," he said. "But it's too late now. You've already missed your chance." John's mind raced as he tried to piece together the meaning of the man's words. What chance had they missed? The man turned and began to walk away, his steps deliberate and measured. "You can follow me," he said, "but it won't change anything. You're too late." John glanced at Olivia, his jaw clenched. They had no choice. They had to follow. But as they walked toward the man, John felt an unsettling sense of urgency. Whatever was coming next, it was happening now, and they weren't ready for it. John and Olivia followed the man down the narrow hallway, the tension in the air palpable. Max was right behind them, his low growl still vibrating in the quiet space, his sharp senses picking up on every shift in the environment. The man in front of them walked with purpose, his steps steady and deliberate, as if he knew exactly where he was going. John's mind was racing. What had they missed? What was the man planning? "You can follow me," the man had said, his voice cold and detached, but John couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. The hallway opened into a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, save for a few old electrical panels. It was an odd place to meet, and John couldn't help but wonder why they had been led here. The man stopped in the center of the room and turned to face them, his eyes hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. "This is where it ends," he said, his voice flat, like he was stating a fact. "Where what ends?" Olivia asked, her voice sharp. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. It was sleek, metallic, and had a faint red glow emanating from it. John's pulse quickened. This was the device they had been chasing all along. The man held it out, his fingers hovering over the buttons. "This is it. The key to everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. John's heart pounded. What did he mean by that? "What is it?" John demanded. The man gave a cold smile. "It's already too late. You've missed your chance to stop it." John stepped forward, ignoring the growing sense of dread in his gut. "What are you talking about? What do you want?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of disdain. "I'm not the one you should be asking. It's too late for you," he said, tapping the device. A soft beep echoed in the room. John's eyes widened. Something was happening, something big. Olivia stepped forward, her hand reaching for her radio. "We need backup. Now," she said, her voice urgent. But before she could speak again, the room plunged into darkness. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Panic surged through John as he heard the sound of footsteps rushing toward them. Max growled, his body tense. The man was gone. They were left in the pitch-black room, with only the distant sound of alarms blaring from somewhere deep in the terminal. John could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. They were too late. Whatever was happening, it was already in motion. The device, the dark figure, the cryptic words, they were all part of something much bigger. And now, they had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. John's breath quickened, the sense of urgency surging through him. They had to act. They couldn't let whatever was happening slip away. "Max," John muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The dog's ears perked up as it sniffed the air. John could feel the pull to move, to do something, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too far behind. A distant noise echoed in the hallway, and John turned toward it, his mind racing. What was that sound? A door opening? Footsteps? It was hard to tell in the deafening silence of the room. "Olivia, stay close," John whispered. She didn't respond, but he could hear her footsteps following him. The sense of danger was thick in the air, but John knew one thing for sure. Time was running out. Whatever was coming next, they had to face it head on. and Max was going to lead the way. John's heart raced as he and Olivia moved quickly through the dark hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Max was at the front, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, guiding them with unerring precision. The lights flickered above them, casting eerie shadows on the walls. John felt a chill creeping up his spine, but there was no time to focus on fear. The man had disappeared, but his cryptic message lingered in John's mind. "You've missed your chance." What chance? What was coming next? They couldn't afford to be too late. The alarms in the distance grew louder, their sharp, piercing sound signaling a threat somewhere in the terminal. John could feel the urgency tightening around him. "Keep moving," he whispered to Olivia, who nodded without a word. Her hand was already gripping the radio, ready to call for backup. But something in John told him they wouldn't have time to wait for help. They had to solve this themselves. Max continued to lead them, his keen senses picking up on every subtle shift in the air. John trusted the dog with his life, and right now, Max seemed to be picking up on something critical. Suddenly, Max stopped in his tracks, his body stiffening. His growl was low but unmistakable. John's instincts kicked in. He followed Max's gaze and saw it. A door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. Behind it, the sound of muffled voices and the faint hum of machinery. They weren't alone. Olivia's hand hovered near her radio, but she held back, sensing the same danger. John nodded to her. They moved toward the door, their steps silent now, the tension thick in the air. As they reached the doorway, Max let out another low growl, warning them. John carefully pushed the door open, peeking inside. What he saw made his stomach drop. The room was filled with equipment, computers, screens, wires, and a small table in the center. At the table sat the man they had been chasing, but he wasn't alone. Another figure, a woman, was beside him, typing furiously on a keyboard. Her face was obscured, but the intensity of her movements told John everything he needed to know. They were working on something that couldn't be good. John motioned for Olivia to stay back as he slowly moved into the room. He could feel the weight of the moment, every second bringing them closer to whatever disaster was about to unfold. Max was already in motion, stepping quietly toward the back of the room, his instincts sharp. The man glanced up, his eyes widening for a brief moment when he saw John and Olivia. But before he could react, the woman spoke. "It's too late. You're already too deep," she said, her voice calm but with a chilling undertone. John froze. Too deep? What was she talking about? He took a step forward, his voice steady. "What are you doing here? What is this?" The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned back to her screen and typed something in, the sound of the keys clicking sharply in the otherwise silent room. John's mind raced. Whatever they were working on, it was important. "We don't have much time," Olivia whispered, her voice low and urgent. John's eyes never left the woman. "What's going to happen?" he asked, his voice harder now. "We're out of time," the man replied, his tone almost defeated. "It's already set in motion. You can't stop it." Max's growl grew louder again, and John felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't just about security anymore. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than them. The woman finished typing and hit a key, and the lights in the room suddenly went out. John's heart skipped a beat. He heard the faint sound of machinery whirring to life. They were running out of time. "Get ready," John muttered to Olivia. They weren't going to leave here without answers. But would they find the truth before it was too late? John's eyes adjusted to the darkness as the room suddenly went black. His mind raced, heart pounding in his chest. The low hum of machinery echoed in the space, its steady rhythm almost calming, but there was nothing peaceful about it. He could hear Olivia's breathing behind him, steady but anxious, and Max's growls reverberated in the silence, warning them of danger lurking nearby. The woman and the man hadn't moved. They were still in front of the screen, working on whatever had triggered the alarms. The only light in the room now came from the faint glow of the machinery. John took a deep breath, his instincts sharp. They needed to move fast. "Olivia, stay close," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the figures in front of them. Olivia nodded, her steps quiet as she positioned herself near him. "What now?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the darkness. John's fingers tightened around the radio in his hand, but he didn't make a call. If they were too deep in the system, they needed to play this carefully. The last thing they wanted was to tip their hand. Max suddenly stopped growling, his body tense. His ears perked up, listening, waiting for something. John followed his gaze. The woman had just pressed a button on the screen. A low beep sounded, followed by the whirring of machinery picking up speed. The air in the room seemed to shift. Something was happening, something big. "It's starting," the woman said in a low, cold voice. John moved forward, his steps deliberate. "Starting what?" he demanded. The man at the table didn't even glance at him. "You've already missed it," he said, his voice a dull echo in the quiet room. "What are you talking about?" John asked, frustration creeping into his voice. The woman finally turned to face him, her eyes cold and calculating. "You think you can stop it now?" she asked, her lips curling into a smile. "It's already set in motion. There's no going back." John felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't let it end like this. Whatever they were trying to do, whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. He couldn't let them get away with it. Max suddenly perked up, his body rigid, and his growl returned, this time louder and more intense. Olivia looked to John, her expression hardening. "We need to shut it down," she said, her voice steady. John nodded, taking a deep breath. "Max, find it," he said, his voice firm. The dog wasted no time, moving swiftly toward the center of the room, his nose working furiously. John and Olivia followed, staying close. The woman and the man didn't move, their eyes locked on the screen as if they were waiting for something to happen. John felt the weight of the moment pressing in. Whatever was about to happen, they couldn't let it unfold. Max reached the table and stopped, his body still, nose to the surface. John's eyes scanned the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers and symbols flashing across it. It wasn't a code he could decipher quickly, but the urgency in the air was unmistakable. "What is this?" John asked, taking a step forward. "What are you doing?" The woman didn't answer. The man just stared at him, a knowing look in his eyes. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "But it's too late for you." John's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a security breach. It was something far bigger. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. He could hear the soft hum of the machinery getting louder, the steady rhythm like the ticking of a clock. Max stood still, waiting, as if he knew that John would have to make the next move. They had to stop this. They had to find a way to pull the plug on whatever was being set in motion. John's hand reached for his radio again, but this time, it wasn't to call for backup. It was to make sure they had a chance to stop it, whatever it was. He took a deep breath, ready to act. "We're not done yet," he muttered to himself, his mind racing as he prepared to make the next move. Time was running out, and they had no more chances to waste. John's grip on his radio tightened as the machine's hum grew louder, and the atmosphere in the room became suffocating. Olivia stood by his side, her expression focused but full of uncertainty. Max, the ever-alert K9, remained still, his sharp eyes fixed on the central screen. The tension was thick, and time seemed to stretch with each passing second. John glanced back at the figures in front of him, the man and the woman, both silent, almost serene, as if they were waiting for something inevitable to unfold. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "You're too late." The man's cold gaze only confirmed the depth of the danger they were facing. John's thoughts raced. Whatever was happening here, it was beyond just a security breach. This was something coordinated, something calculated. The system, the devices, the people involved, it was all connected. They couldn't let this continue. John stepped forward, his voice firm. "Shut it down. Now." The man didn't respond. He just kept his eyes fixed on the screen, as if he were watching a clock ticking down to an inevitable moment. John felt his pulse quicken. This couldn't wait. Every instinct screamed at him to act. Olivia moved cautiously behind him, her hand still clutching her radio, but the signal was useless in this room. The devices were blocking all communications. It was just them, Max, and the two mysterious figures. John reached for the control panel beside the screen, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. As he began to press the buttons, the man finally spoke, his voice low but laced with an unsettling calm. "You can't stop it," he said. "It's already in motion." John didn't look up. He didn't need to hear it again. He had no intention of backing down now. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. His fingers moved quickly, pressing the sequence he hoped would give him access to the system. The beeping from the machine increased in frequency, almost as if the device itself were aware of his actions. The woman finally turned to face him. "You don't know what you're doing," she warned, her eyes cold. But there was a flicker of something behind them. A hesitation? Or was it just the cold resolve of someone who knew they had won? The thought gnawed at John, but he pushed it aside. He had to keep going. Max suddenly perked up, his ears straight as he shifted his weight, ready to act. John looked down at his partner, the dog's instincts never wrong. "Good boy," he muttered, his voice steady. Max had been their guide, their protector. John couldn't let him down now. The hum of the machine grew louder. And then, just as John thought he had finally cracked the code, the lights flickered, and the room went completely dark. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the machinery, and then silence. John froze, his senses heightened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in. Then, a faint glow appeared from the far corner of the room. The screens blinked back to life, but this time, the images were different. It wasn't just code, it was a map. A map of the airport, yes, but it extended beyond. It stretched into a complex network, a web of systems and locations across the city. John's heart raced. This wasn't just about the airport, it was bigger, much bigger. The map showed hidden connections, encrypted routes, and key points where security systems had been compromised. This was the heart of something more dangerous, and it was all connected. The woman stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "You see now, don't you?" she said softly. John didn't respond. The truth was undeniable. This was only the beginning. He had hoped to stop whatever was about to happen, but now he realized they were only scratching the surface. "We need to move," John said, his voice firm, his resolve hardening. "This isn't over." Max's low growl was a clear sign that they weren't alone. John's eyes snapped toward the door. Something was coming. The game had just changed, and they had no choice but to face it head on.